Hello Magic players, this is Jumbo Commander and I have an Azorius deck tech featuring Noyan Dar, Roil Shaper. Noyan Dar is 3 white-blue for a 4/4 legendary merfolk ally, and Noyan Dar says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may put 3 +1/+1 counters on target land you control. If you do, that land becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste that's still a land. That's right, we're going to play Spells Matter, and we're going to be turning our lands into elementals and turning them sideways. We're going to be casting instants and sorceries all over the place, getting value from each one, and playing an overall controlling game. Let's take a look at how Noyan Dar shapes up. The first thing that we need is some protection. Whenever we have a deck that's really centered around the commander, we want to make sure that that commander stays on the board. First, we have pretty classic pieces of protection, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. Now, one of our themes is Spells Matter, and we just showed 2 artifacts. So let's look at some spells that protect. How about Valorous Stance, which can make target creature indestructible or destroy something with big toughness? That only targets one thing. How about Make a Stand, which can target your entire board? And if you're turning your lands into creatures, we have to be very, very careful. So something like Make a Stand, where everything gets indestructible, can protect not only Noyan Dar, but also all of our lands as well. You can also gain a surprising amount of protection by flashing your spells in at instant speed. So I mentioned that we also want to be protecting our lands. We'd hate to animate our entire mana base and then have them die to a board wipe. So how about Equinox? 1 white for an enchant land, and when you tap that land, you counter a spell that destroys 1 or more of your lands. This is a hilarious and awesome old card that will cause so much strife, but it's really cool. I mean, obviously, if someone points a kill spell at your land, tap Equinox, it's countered. Okay, great, easy. But there's some corner case scenarios that kind of don't work. For example, let's say that you have an animated land with Noyan Dar and someone tries to lightning bolt your land. Well, you might think that Equinox would counter that. It does not, because the spell does 3 damage to the land, and it's like the game rules that kill the land, so Equinox doesn't counter it. Oh, it's like a headache. Same goes with things that randomly target or enter the battlefield effects and stuff like that. But it doesn't matter. Equinox is still pretty powerful and kind of super interesting, so it's a definite include. Sacred Ground is much easier. It's just 1 and a white. Whenever a spell or ability an opponent controls causes a land to be put into the graveyard from play, return that land to play. So if they kill your lands, they just come right back again, and I think that's really cool. You might lose all your counters, you might lose some momentum, some tempo, but you'll never lose your entire mana base, and that's pretty cool as well. And then we have a classic, which makes your creatures great in combat, Terra Eternal. All lands are indestructible. That could just make huge creatures that are just really, really hard to deal with. So it turns a very corner case and kind of weird card into something really powerful. I think these enchantments are very cool protection for your mana base. There's one more land-centric card that matches even better because it defends your lands and it's an instant. Teferi's Response. 1 and a blue for a counterspell. Counter target spell or ability an opponent controls that targets a land you control. If a permanent's ability is countered this way, destroy that permanent. Draw 2 cards. This is so cool. I mean, it's so corner case. You could never use this in any deck but this one. So just imagine someone has like a Doomblade. Okay, you not only counter the Doomblade, but you draw 2 cards for 2 mana. Oh, this is magical. But even better, just imagine if someone tries to Viscera the Dreadful your land. Okay, for 2 mana, you not only counter Viscera's ability, you destroy that permanent and you draw 2 cards. That is a crazy amount of value if someone just happens to try and attack your land base. I mean, it's awesome. This even works on things like Planeswalkers. Like maybe someone's trying to tap down your stuff. No, I'm going to counter that ability, okay, and destroy the permanent and draw 2 cards. This is just going to blow out some of your opponents. This is a spell-centric deck So let's take a look at all the spells that we can cast. Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Return to Dust, Council's Judgment. At its heart, this is a control deck, so we need some of the best control elements found in white. Okay, this is a Spells Matter deck, so we want some forward momentum with simple card draw spells like Ponder and Preordain, Brainstorm, Impulse, Anticipate, all of those great spells that'll just kind of help you select and move forward as you cast more and more spells. But this is also a control deck, so you might need some selection with cards like Dig Through Time or even Tutors. Okay. You also are constantly animating your lands, so a card like Steady Progress, which is a cantrip, it draws you a card, but also could get your whole army of elemental lands bigger as you proliferate them, can be really powerful. Similarly, Tezzeret's Gambit does a similar effect, but lets you draw 2 cards, so I like that a little bit better. A powerful proliferate spell, Fuel for the Cause, is excellent. Counter target spell, then proliferate. Okay, we're gonna need a lot of counters in this because this deck is very vulnerable. Okay, it's a control deck that is easily disassembled. We need to try so hard to protect Noyan Dar and all of our lands just to be able to get advantage out of them. So we need lots of counter spells, we need lots of protection, and then we need to gain all of this incidental value later. So we need to be very careful about the spells we play, but also the spells that we counter from our opponents. Consider all of the great counterspells that can protect your deck. Cryptic Command, Mystic Confluence, Insidious Will, Swan Song, Negate, Muddle the Mixture, Render Silent, Arcane Denial, Counterspell, Disallow. All of these are going to have a different application, but we're going to need a critical mass of counterspells for this deck. We're going to be wanting to play at instant speed and protecting our resources. We're playing a lot of counterspells, so why not pair it with Baral, Chief of Compliance? It makes our instants and sorcery spells we cast 1 cheaper. That's going to be great. Mana is very, very tight in this deck, so anywhere we can save mana is awesome. But also, we get to loot every time we counter a spell. And again, we need to move through our deck and find the answers we need, because it's a control deck. Also, Jace's Sanctum does something similar, but it's a little bit more resilient because it's an enchantment. But it costs a little bit more, so there's a little bit of a trade-off there. Next 2 instants synergize extremely well with Noyan Dar. First up, 2 arms! Exclamation point. 1 and a white. For an instant, untap all creatures you control, draw a card. Now, at one point, this was probably a very mediocre ambush card. You know, you're untap your tapped creature and block theirs in limited. It's so good. But wait a second. In this deck, it is actually so good. Think about this. You have Noyan Dar on the battlefield, maybe a couple of lands or creatures now. Now, it's 1 and a white. Untap all of your lands. So this is kind of for free. This could actually generate mana. It creates a creature just by casting it, and the card replaces itself. That's insane value. I mean, that's just a great card, and I love these corner case cards because it takes a really mediocre combat trick designed for limited and turns it into a card that's like, wait, what does that do? I love it. Similarly, we have Unity of Purpose. 3 and a blue for support 2. Untap each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Again, it's kind of supposed to be an ambush card. You know, you support something, then you untap. But in this one, it can untap all of your lands, just like 2 arms. Man, these cards are going to be really cool. They're going to ambush your opponents. They're going to generate mana. They're going to cycle through your deck. Very interesting interactions. Lands smash. Celestial Colonnade and Fairy Conclave are very powerful because you could animate these cards and turn them into 0/0 elementals. Great, that's fine, whatever. But then you invest a little bit more mana and they become flying vigilant creatures. Ooh, or just a flying creature with these +1/+1 counters on them. So these are very flexible lands. They help you cast your spells. Celestial Colonnade fixes, it's wonderful. But then if you have the mana to invest in it, you can make them evasive. Blinkmoth Nexus and Inkmoth Nexus are also evasive threats, but Inkmoth Nexus can just kill. You just cast a few spells, animating Moth Nexus. Now you're making sort of a flying... It's just 3 spells, by the way. 3 spells, animating Moth Nexus, and suddenly you're dealing 10 poison damage. It's disgusting. Darksteel Citadel can give you an indestructible creature, and Darksteel Garrison can make your land indestructible. I don't think Darksteel Garrison is that good, but you have the Future Sight frame, and it's the only fortification in the game, and this is like the only deck it could just barely go into. So I'm running Darksteel Garrison. I think it's pretty ridiculous. All right, this is one of the reasons why I was inspired to make this deck, and it's my wipeout section. At the heart of this deck is a single phrase: destroy all non-land blank. That is the phrase that makes this deck run. So destroy all non-land creatures? Yes. Destroy all non-land permanents? Absolutely. This leaves your awesome land creatures intact, so you get a discount one-sided board wipe. Very nice. Mirror Weave is magical. It's an instant. I love it. It's an instant board wipe in this deck. 2 Azorius, and it's easy to cast too. What else can I ask for this? Each other creature becomes a copy of target non-legendary creature until end of turn. So what this does is you target one of your animated lands, okay? Those animated lands are 0/0 elementals. They just don't die because Noyan Dar puts +1/+1 counters on them. So when you Mirror Weave a 0/0 elemental, everything turns into 0/0 elementals, and everything dies except all of your stuff with +1/+1 counters on them. Meaning this is a huge instant speed, one-sided board wipe that really gets around a lot of other abilities. I mean, just imagine if they have indestructible. No, they just become a 0/0 elemental and boom, you've wiped the board. I mean, this is flexible and easy to cast and instant speed. It's just the board wipe of this deck. Oh, how embarrassing. I just called Mirror Weave the board wipe of this deck, and then here comes Tragic Arrogance and Cataclysmic Gearhulk. These are just amazing. Okay, let's take a read. For each player, you choose from among the permanents that player controls an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker. Then each player sacrifices all other non-land permanents he or she controls. Okay, now you might think, oh, this is awful. If you have a bunch of lands that are also creatures, aren't you putting them at risk to sacrifice? Oh, no. They are excluded from the Tragic Arrogance. It says sacrifices all other non-land permanents. So you can just choose whatever creature you want. All your creature lands are safe. And Tragic Arrogance has the added upside of being able to be very political. You pick whatever cool or horrible creature your opponents have, and you really limit their board. Cataclysmic Gearhulk is amazing too because it's all that on a body. Oblivion Stone, Perilous Vault, All is Dust, even the new Boom Pile, all of them do very similar effects where they destroy all non-land permanents. Actually, there's a lot of these board wipe effects in this deck, so you might want to trim some of them. I don't know. Displacement Wave. X blue, return all non-land permanents with converted mana cost X or less to their owner's hands. This is a little bit less flexible because it could cost a lot of mana, especially in Commander where people are dropping 8 drops, 9 drops, okay? But I love the ability to interact with permanents. Okay? This deck can deal with creatures pretty well, but sometimes a Planeswalker or a problematic enchantment could get us, so having Displacement Wave to answer those is really powerful. Along with Devastation Tide, return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. It's a very reasonable cost, and the Miracle is just gravy. Coastal Breach was what kind of inspired me to make this deck. Return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand. Again, you're just bouncing everything, creating more dudes, and using your lands to take out your opponent. It's such an interesting and fun synergy. We can keep going. Crush of Tentacles. Return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. Make an 8/8 blue octopus. Yes. And we easily can search this because we have a lot of those 1 mana cantrips, those really small spells, because the spells matter so much in this deck. I want an octopus to attack my opponents with. And if I want an octopus, I might as well have a Leviathan as well. Keteric Leviathan does the same effect, but on a creature. This deck is going to be very creature light. The only ones we've spoken of is the Keterek Leviathan that I just mentioned and Noyan Dar himself. So let's take a look at what slots we do devote to creatures. We really need to hit our land drops, and Azorius is not the best for giving us any sort of ramp. So cards like Weathered Wayfarer, Knight of the White Orchid, Core Cartographer are kind of the best we can do in white. You can also add, of course, your Implement of Artifact mana, Signets, Soul Ring, things like that. But also consider Land Tax, an enchantment that can fill your hand full of land drops, and also Sword of the Animist, which can let you get lands if you attack. The problem is this deck is very creature light. I think you need to decide on your own build and whether Sword of the Animist is worth an include. But I love the card overall. If you want to go over the top with your creature lands, you can consider doubling the +1/+1 counters on them by using Deep Glow Skate. Or you can just pump them all up with Mirror Entity. See, all of your creatures are 0/0 land elementals, but with Mirror Entity you can move up that 0/0 base power and toughness for however much mana you're willing to spend. But there is a sort of push and pull with Mirror Entity. You want to invest mana, but mana is also your creatures, so you can't just dump all your mana into it because some of your mana needs to be attacking. Now, just a little bit of a disclaimer. If you want to have a little bit more of an aggressive push, then these cards for making your land guys big really is cool. And I'm not gonna lie, these are very fun cards, but I've had a little bit more success moving away from trying to pump up your lands by just controlling the board more and letting your lands grow large naturally. This is a Spells Matter deck. Let's get some Spells Matter creatures. How about a non-creature permanent? Metallurgic Summonings is going to put some crazy artifacts onto the battlefield. Talrand Sky Summoner. This is what this deck started as, by the way. I had a Talrand deck, and I didn't like it. It was oppressive. I just played counterspells all the time. I'm like, screw it, Talrand, you're out. Noyan Dar, you are in. And it's a way more fun deck. It's not as good, but it's way more fun. How about also Monastery Mentor, Docent of Perfection? All of these Spells Matter cards can sort of replace and supplement Noyan Dar. Also consider some cards that'll help you gain additional value from your spent instant and sorceries. How about Torrential Gear Hulk or Snapcaster Mage? There's even the Mnemonic Wall or the Wizard that does it. There's a lot of ways that you can pull instants and sorceries back from your graveyard, and you can utilize those to make sure that you can cast your best instants and sorceries more than once. Spelltwine is a sorcery that kind of does something powerful as well. You might also want to include Diluvian Primordial. I mean, there's so many Spells Matters creatures. I think the key is to make sure to keep your creature count pretty low and make sure that you are consistent with the strategy of control and sort of momentum and let Noyan Dar do your murdering for you. Eventually, we'll want to win the game with our gigantic lands. How about flying over our opponents with a Halimar Tidecaller, an Abzan Falconer, or an Archetype of Imagination? All of these creatures will allow us to send our lands to the sky and fly in, killing our opponent. Halimar Tidecaller has a very interesting secondary ability, and I really want you to think of it as a secondary ability. Okay, you can return an Awaken card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, there's a few Awaken cards that are really strong. The extra turn Awaken card, extra turn spells could be a really good strategy in this deck. Or the Planner Outburst, the Board Wipe Awaken card, the Awaken counter spell. But some people go too deep on Awaken just to get this cool synergy, and I don't think that's really a good idea. Awaken is usually very expensive to cast, and that usually leaves you vulnerable after you cast the Awaken spell. So instead, I like Noyan Dar to do my Awakening, and I hope that Halimar Tidecaller, might gain me value, but really is there just to send my lands to the sky. That has been my Noyan Dar Roil Shaper deck, and I am always happy to bust out this deck. It's actually become my preferred control deck. Now, I mentioned before this used to be a Talrand Sky Summoner deck, and I never enjoyed playing it. It was always really oppressive. It was very powerful, but I found that toning down the power level and going for a strategy that's a little bit more fun really improved my play experience with this deck. Now, you're going to be miserable unless you pay attention to a few pieces of key advice I have for you. Okay. Number one, you need to protect your stuff. Okay. You need to be able to protect Noyan Dar. You need to be able to protect your lands. Okay. Because if you have a control deck that's floundering and your lands are getting destroyed, you're just going to be miserable. Okay, so make sure you hit your land drops. Okay, when you build this deck, give it a few extra lands. Okay, give it the appropriate mana ramp so you don't end up pinched on mana turn after turn after turn. Okay, be careful with Noyan Dar. You can easily, I mean, you might even kill him yourself with a few of those board wipes, and you could be very easily put him out of casting range. So a lot of times I might ramp a little bit early game and then wait until even I have 7 mana or 8 mana before I cast Noyan Dar for the first time, just to have some protection up. Remember, this is a control deck, so use your controlling resources well. Counter stuff that really matters. And in the early game, you know, maybe don't play those cantrips. Maybe just set up your mana, just hold on to cards, and wait until someone threatens you. Use your life as a life total as an advantage, and eventually when you have a lot of mana on the battlefield, oh, this deck just goes into high gear. You're going to play a few spells in a turn, you're going to counter something, your lands are going to get huge, and people are just going to be like, oh my gosh, how are we going to stop this person? Because every spell you cast gains you another land creature, something else, you know, a metallurgic summoning dude, and it just gets out of control from there, and that's when this deck becomes really fun to play. This has been Jumbo Commander with another deck tech, and I want to thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button, okay? And if you have a question about this video, or if you just want to say hi, please leave a comment. I love talking to you guys. It's been pretty great doing these deck techs and interacting with the Magic community. So I want to thank you one more time, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Bye.